Independence. It's more than just having your own free will. In life, independence is something of a rite of passage as you enter adulthood and get out on your own. In college athletics, though, independence takes on a different meaning. To be independent means to have nearly complete control over your scheduling and revenue. For people like me, Notre Dame will often come up when the topic is discussed. The Fighting Irish have been the epitome of independence in college football for decades now, and have even inspired other schools to give independence a try. Just ask BYU, who tried to be the Notre Dame of the West in football before joining the Big 12 last year. However, in recent years, the number of independent schools has dwindled. Just in the past couple of years, we've seen the number of FBS independents drop from 7 in 2022 to just 2 by 2025. But why is that? Hello everyone, my name is Austin Bruce, and welcome back to Outside the Hash Marks. Now, independence in college football has lost its luster, and today I'll be looking at the state of independence and whether it's still feasible in the current college football landscape. It is important to note, before we get too far along, that many schools who have been or are independent in football do have primary conferences for other sports. There are very few schools across all divisions that are completely independent for all sports. These days, most schools who are independent are only temporarily independent as they are transitioning from one division to another. With that disclaimer out of the way, let's jump right in. For as long as college football has existed, so too have independents. For over 100 years, being in a conference, not just for football, but for all college sports, offered one real benefit. It made scheduling easier. Until recent waves of realignment, conferences were almost exclusively geographically based by design to help alleviate and minimize travel. Still, being in a conference or being independent didn't really matter when it came to the ultimate prize, a national title. In fact, in my opinion, being independent was arguably better than being in a conference due to increased scheduling flexibility. Independents were allowed to schedule as tough or as soft as they wished, with the only real consequence being respectability. And this is all because prior to the 1990s, there was no true method of determining a national champion. Instead, that was left up to the polls and the people who voted on them. The only real thing that mattered in the decades prior, beyond wins and losses, was brand recognition. It's just a small part of the reason why the polls themselves don't determine a national champion anymore. For independents and conference members alike, brand recognition was achieved through what we refer to as marquee matchups, games between two national brands that most pollsters and fans would turn their attention towards. For many teams, this meant scheduling opponents from across the country. It's partly why Notre Dame's rivalries with Stanford and USC exist. For independents, increased scheduling flexibility made this easier to do. However, this would all rapidly change towards the end of the 20th century. For the better part of 30 years, the NCAA controlled all broadcasting rights as it pertained to college football games. I'm actually in the process of writing a research paper related to this very topic and would love to share some of my findings in a future video. Anyways, this would lead to some of the more prominent schools, 63 to be exact, to form the College Football Association, a group dedicated to getting their own TV rights separate from the NCAA. Naturally, the NCAA responded by threatening schools participating in the CFB with sanctions in all sports. It all came to a head in 1984. Following a lengthy legal battle, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Oklahoma and Georgia over the NCAA. They stated that the schools controlled their television rights and that the NCAA's contracts would be null and void. The CFA was thus allowed to negotiate contracts for the member schools in what was thought to be a happy ending. Until it wasn't. In 1990, Notre Dame became the CFA's first defector, signing a lucrative deal with NBC that they still have to this day. It relegated CFA to a similar situation that the schools were in under the NCAA's contracts, a deal which saw the schools have limited appearances on television. It didn't take long for more defections to follow. In 1995, the SEC broke off to sign their own deal with CBS, marking the beginning of the end for the CFA. The CFA ultimately ceased operations in 1997. Still, this doesn't quite answer the question of why independence fell of relevancy. For many people, they will say that money was the root of all of this, and to a certain degree, that is true. However, it was actually exposure that led to the decline in independent schools. See, when the SEC signed the contract with CBS, it only dished out about $100 million over 5 years. And it really wasn't all that more than what the CFA's contracts were giving. At the time, Dickey had stated, quote, "The money wasn't the issue. The exposure and the money together made it the best package." Under the CFA, exposure was still limited. Following the landmark deal for the SEC, other conferences began following suit as they tried to get their own exclusive deals with networks. This left independents in an odd spot. Not every independent held the same level of notoriety as others. To schools such as Notre Dame, Army, and Navy, independence was tradition and their entire identity. For others, the writing was on the wall. Though they could remain independent and still be successful, these schools knew that joining a conference was dire. In the span of just 10 years, from 1991 to 2001, the Big East began sponsoring football, and the Conference USA and Sun Belt were formed. This struck a glancing blow to independence. By the 2004 season, there were just 2 independents at the FBS level after there being 25 in 1990. Many of those teams that joined conferences would later become known as Group of 5 teams, but some national powers like Florida State, Miami, Penn State, and Pittsburgh also found residence in conferences. The number of independence teams would fluctuate over the years, with Notre Dame, Army, Navy, and BYU being the primary mainstays. The number peaked at 7 teams in the 2021 and 2022 seasons. Even with the growing revenue gap between Group of 5 schools and Power 5 schools, schools such as UMass, New Mexico State, and Liberty were able to make independence work. Still, a major change to the college football landscape has nearly wiped out FBS independence. With the announcement of the 12-team playoff, the Group of 5 now finally has a feasible path to compete for a national championship. There's just one catch. That Group of 5 team must be a conference champion. There is no exception to that rule. Now, this wasn't anything new. During the 4-team CFP era, only the highest-ranked Group of 5 champion would qualify for one of the New Year's 6 bowl games. However, with Notre Dame being the only independent considered a power conference school by the playoff committee, the path to a playoff bid as a Group of 5 independent, even with an expanded field, will likely be next to impossible. This harsh reality was only accelerated by conference realignment. The Big 12's first round of realignment saw them dip into the Group of 5 and pluck Houston, Cincinnati, and UCF from the American, as well as FBS independent BYU. What followed is a wild domino effect that saw New Mexico State, Liberty, and Army all follow BYU's footsteps and give up their independent status in football. New Mexico State and Liberty joined the CUSA for all sports, while Army joined the American as a football-only member following SMU's departure to the ACC. Most recently, UMass accepted an invitation to join the Mid-American Conference for all sports beginning in 2025. UMass had previously been a member of the MAC when they first moved up to the FBS, but they were forced out when they refused to join the conference as a full member. With UMass being a founding member of the Atlantic 10 Conference, the move comes as somewhat surprising. This has left just 2 independents at the FBS level, Notre Dame and UConn. This begs the question, just how much longer will independence be a thing? In my opinion, that answer almost entirely depends on Notre Dame. I firmly believe that UConn will eventually cave in and join a conference as a football-only member, with my guess being the CUSA as a traveling partner for incoming member Delaware. With Notre Dame, things are very different. As a full-time member of the ACC apart from football, the Irish already have an easier than expected time filling out their schedule. This is because of their contract with the ACC, which requires them to have 4 to 5 games against ACC opponents during the season. Additionally, an expanded playoff makes it even easier for the Irish to get in, not to mention their lucrative deal with NBC. While Notre Dame was not the only independent to have a television contract, theirs offered by far the most exposure and the most money. That's all thanks to the national brand they had built in the decades prior while achieving blue blood status. If the Irish were to join a conference, they would be contractually obligated to join the ACC. It's perhaps part of the reason why Notre Dame was so vocal for the ACC to vote to add Stanford, Cal, and SMU. They were wanting one of their main football rivals to not only maintain power conference status, but join the conference they were already affiliated with. Of course, it's also just as likely, if not more likely, that they did this to fulfill their ACC scheduling requirements with a game that's already played annually in hopes of scheduling more quality opponents. Regardless, the Irish's easier playoff access becomes somewhat negated by the format. Under the current format, the top 4 conference champions are guaranteed a bye into the second round. This means that even if Notre Dame was to go 12-1 and was ranked number 1 in the final rankings, they'd still have to play a first round game as the number 5 seed. Of course, Notre Dame actually has their own spot on the CFP board and voted in favor of the 12-team playoff format, a vote which was required to be unanimous. It wasn't some surprise sprung on the Irish. They knew what they agreed to. It's fair to question if not getting a first round bye when they have a team ranked within the top 4 would be enough to make them at least consider joining the ACC. It's a great hypothetical question, but one that only time will tell. For now, the Irish seem to want to retain their independence as long as they can. Perhaps the ACC's next media rights negotiations in the 2030s could coax the Irish to join the conference for football. Still, one thing is for certain. Independence is becoming a thing of the past. The notion of being independent for an extended period of time is one that's becoming less feasible, especially if you're not already an established brand. But I want to hear your thoughts. Can independence still be a way of life in the ever-evolving college football landscape? Let me know in the comments down below. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. And as always, remember to keep the college football flame burning.